The silver ball came down from the sky on a Tuesday morning. People in Kansas looked up from their coffee and watched it land in Joe Miller's wheat field, with a soft thud that barely disturbed the grain. Lisa Carter was having her morning briefing at the Pentagon when every alarm in the building started going off. She ran to the main control room, where dozens of screens showed the same thing. A perfectly round metal object sitting in the middle of nowhere, doing absolutely nothing. Any radiation? None. No heat signature either. It's like it's not even there, except we can all see it. Within an hour, every news channel was showing the same wheat field. Joe Miller stood at the edge of his property, scratching his head and talking to reporters. Just came down real gentle like, he told the cameras. The military arrived next. Trucks, helicopters, and soldiers in full gear surrounded the silver ball. They set up a perimeter and waited. Nobody knew what to do with humanity's first visitor from space. That's when the ball started to change. The metal surface began to ripple like water. 3 figures stepped out, and every human watching held their breath. They looked almost like people, but not quite. They were tall and thin, with skin that seemed to glow from inside. Their faces were longer than human faces, and their eyes were too large. Raise one hand in what might have been a greeting. When it spoke, its voice was clear and calm. "We mean no harm to your people," it said in perfect English. "We have come to speak with your leaders." Later, flying toward Kansas with a team of diplomats, scientists, and soldiers. She had been in the military for 20 years. Nothing had prepared her for this moment. President Karen Hayes was in Washington, making the hardest decision of her presidency. Should she meet these aliens? Should she send others? This was all a trick. We have to talk to them, she told her advisors. We need to know what they want. The meeting was set up in a hastily built tent at the edge of the wheat field. The aliens waited patiently while humans ran around setting up cameras, security systems, and communication equipment. They seemed curious about all the activity, but never complained. When President Hayes arrived, the lead aliens stood up from a simple metal chair that had somehow appeared from nowhere. It was taller than she expected, nearly 7 feet, but its movements were graceful and non-threatening. "I am Envoy Kethnine," it said, offering what might have been a bow. "I speak for the Galactic Defense Initiative." President Hayes sat down across from the alien, trying to keep her hands steady. Jake Martinez and several other officials who had been chosen for this historic moment. "Welcome to Earth," she said, hoping her voice sounded calmer than she felt. "What brings you to our world?" "We have been watching your species for some time. You've reached a level of development that requires protection." "Protection from what?" asked Dr. Martinez, leaning forward in his chair. "The galaxy is not a safe place," the alien replied. "There are many threats that young civilizations cannot handle alone. Pirates who steal resources, slavers who take entire populations, destroyers who eliminate planets for sport." The humans exchanged glances. This was not what they had expected to hear on humanity's first day of contact with aliens. "And you protect other worlds from these threats?" President Hayes asked. "Yes, we are the Galactic Defense Initiative. We have protected hundreds of species. From the dangers of space, we can do the same for Earth." General Rodriguez cleared his throat. "What would this protection involve?" Envoy Kethnine seemed to relax slightly. "Standard procedures. We would establish defense stations around your solar system. We would patrol your space and protect your trade routes when you begin to travel between stars." "And what would we need to provide in return?" asked Amy Johnson, the Secretary of State. "Resources, naturally. Raw materials for our ships and stations. Soldiers to help with defense. Compliance with Galactic Defense Initiative regulations for safety." The tent fell silent except for the sound of wheat rustling in the Kansas wind. Joe Miller could be seen in the distance, still talking to reporters, and pointing at his field. Colonel Steve Parker, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "You mentioned pirates and slavers and destroyers. Can you give us specific examples? Names of these groups? Documentation of attacks?" For the first time, Envoy Kethnine hesitated. "The threats are well known throughout the galaxy. All civilizations face them. Incident reports, battle accounts, something we could study." "Information is classified for security reasons," the alien replied. "You must trust our experience in these matters." Lisa Carter frowned. Felt familiar, and not in a good way. How many other worlds are you currently protecting? She asked. Many. The exact number is also classified. And how successful have you been? Any worlds lost to these threats? President. Hayes leaned back in her chair. But this is a decision that will affect all of humanity. We need time to consider your proposal. The alien's large eyes seemed to study each human face in turn. Of course, but do not take too long. The threats we speak of do not wait for bureaucratic processes. A few weeks at most. The galaxy moves quickly, and opportunities for protection are not always available. As the meeting ended, the aliens returned to their ship. The silver ball sealed itself and sat silently in the wheat field, giving no indication of the beings inside. That evening, President Hayes held an emergency cabinet meeting in the White House. The room was full of people trying to process what they had heard. Something doesn't feel right, said Dr. Martinez. They're offering to protect us, but they won't tell us from what specifically. And why now? Added Lisa Carter, who had flown back from Kansas. Why haven't we seen any evidence of them? Our space programs have been operating for decades. Amy Johnson was taking notes on a yellow pad. The whole thing sounds like a sales pitch. They're creating fear to sell us something we might not need. Colonel Parker nodded. In my experience, when someone offers you protection without showing you the threat, they usually are the threat. But not everyone was suspicious. Dr. Ben Clark from NASA argued that humanity might be too small to notice galactic dangers. We're like ants looking at an elephant, he said. Maybe there really are threats out there that we can't see yet. The debate continued late into the night. Outside, Joe Miller was doing interviews on the late-night talk shows. He seemed to be enjoying the attention. They were polite enough, he told one host. But they kept looking up at the sky like they were nervous about something. Made me wonder what they were worried about. Meanwhile, in a small bedroom in California, 12-year-old Emma Chen was listening to radio frequencies on equipment she had built herself. She was trying to hear alien communications, hoping to be part of history. What she heard instead would change everything. Emma Chen pressed her ear against the headphones and adjusted the radio frequency dial. It was 3 a.m, and her parents thought she was asleep. Instead, she was in her bedroom with equipment she had built from parts ordered online. Trying to catch alien radio signals, for 2 days, she had heard nothing but static and normal Earth communications. Then, at 3:17 a.m., she heard voices speaking in a language that sounded like wind chimes mixed with clicking sounds. Emma grabbed her phone and started recording. She didn't understand the words, but she could hear the tone. The voices sounded worried, maybe even scared. One voice kept repeating the same phrase over and over. Across the country in Washington, Dr. Rachel Kim was having trouble sleeping too. She worked at a think tank that studied human behavior, and the alien meeting had been bothering her for days. She sat at her kitchen table with printed copies of every word the aliens had said, highlighting sections with different colored markers. Dan, look at this, she said to her research partner over the phone. I've been analyzing their speech patterns. They're using classic evasion techniques. Dr. Dan Morris was at his own kitchen table, also unable to sleep. What do you mean? When we asked for specific examples of threats, they gave general answers. When we asked for numbers, they said it was classified. When we asked for documentation, they said it was for security. These are the same patterns we see in human deception. Rachel spread the papers across her table. Either they're lying, or they've learned to communicate exactly like humans who are lying. In California, Dr. Ben Clark was having his own doubts. He worked at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and he had been studying the video footage of the alien ship. Something was bothering him about their technology. It's impressive, he told his colleague Dr. Sophie Taylor over coffee the next morning. But it's not that impressive. It's maybe 50 years ahead of us, not thousands. Sophie looked at the photos. On Ben's computer screen? What makes you think that? Look at the whole design. It's efficient, but it follows the same aerodynamic principles we use. And the energy signatures we detected suggest they're using advanced versions of propulsion systems we already understand. Then click through more images. If they're really part of a galactic civilization that's been around for thousands of years, their technology should be completely alien to us. This feels more like what humans might build in 2075. Meanwhile, in Kansas, Joe Miller was getting tired of reporters camping in his yard, but he kept talking to them because he had noticed something strange about the aliens that nobody else seemed to care about. They didn't know what coffee was, he told a reporter from CNN. I offered them some when they first came out of that ship, and they looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. The reporter nodded politely, but Joe could tell he thought. This was a silly detail. You don't understand? Joe continued. If they've been watching us for so long, if they know our language perfectly, how do they not know about coffee? It's everywhere. It's in our movies, our books, our daily life. What kind of research did they do? That same day, Colonel Steve Parker was having a meeting with intelligence officers from several agencies. They had been tasked with finding out everything they could about the Galactic Defense Initiative. We've searched every database, every astronomical record, every radio signal we've ever detected, reported CIA operative Nick Turner. There's no evidence of any galactic civilization, no trace of these supposed threats they're protecting us from. What about the ship itself? Asked Parker. We've been scanning it continuously. It's definitely not human technology, but it's not as advanced as we expected. The metal shows signs of manufacturing techniques, not the seamless construction you'd expect from a truly advanced civilization. Maria Santos, an investigative journalist who had been brought in as a consultant, raised her hand. Been looking at this from a different angle. What if we're asking the wrong questions? Do you mean? Asked Parker. Instead of asking what they're protecting us from, what if we ask what they're protecting us for? What if Earth has something they want, and they need us compliant to get it? The room fell silent as everyone considered this possibility. That night, Emma Chen made her breakthrough. She had been recording alien transmissions for days, and she had started to notice patterns. Using translation software and her own knowledge of linguistics, she began to decode simple words and phrases. Most of it was routine communication about ship maintenance and status reports. But one transmission was different. It was clearly urgent, and Emma managed to translate key parts of it. Patrol frequency increasing, she wrote in her notebook. Subjects asking too many questions. Recommend acceleration of timeline. Emma stared at the words she had written. Timeline for what? She grabbed her phone and called her mother. Mom, I need you to call someone important right now. Dr. Linda Chen was a linguistics professor at Stanford, and she was used to her daughters. Late-night discoveries? But this time, Emma sounded genuinely frightened. What did you find, sweetheart? The aliens are talking to someone else, and they're worried about us. They're saying we're asking too many questions, and they want to speed something up. Linda Chen was wide awake now. You sure about the translation? Pretty sure. Mom, I think they're planning something, and they don't want us to figure it out. Within an hour, Linda Chen was on the phone with contacts at the Defense Department. By morning, Emma's recordings were being analyzed by the best cryptographers. In the government, the results were disturbing. The aliens were definitely reporting to someone else, and they were clearly concerned about human curiosity. More translations revealed references to harvester fleets and collection schedules. Dr. Rachel Kim was called to an emergency meeting at the Pentagon. She brought her analysis of alien speech patterns, and now it was being combined with Emma's intercepted communications. They're not just lying, she told the assembled officials. They're actively deceiving us. The speech patterns, the evasive answers, the manufactured urgency. This is a con game on a galactic scale. Admiral Lisa Carter looked at the evidence, spread across the conference table. So what are they really after? Unknown, said Nick Turner. But based on the communications, it involves something called harvesters, and they're on some kind of schedule. Dr. Ben Clark had been brought in to analyze the technical aspects. The more I study their ship, the more I think they're not the advanced civilization they claim to be. They're more like galactic middle management. What do you mean? Asked General Rodriguez. I think they work for someone else. It's a real power. Their job is to soften up worlds like Earth, make us dependent on their protection before the real threat arrives. Colonel Parker leaned forward, like a protection racket. Exactly. They create the fear, offer the solution, and collect payment until the real criminals show up to collect what they're really after. Joe Miller was still in Kansas, still talking to reporters, when the government agents came to interview him. They wanted to know every detail about his interactions with the aliens. They were nervous, he told them again, kept looking up at the sky like they were expecting something. And they asked weird questions about our agriculture, our population, our industrial capacity. Not the kind of questions you'd ask if you were just here to help. Did they seem curious about anything specific? Asked the agent. Our energy production. They wanted to know about our power plants, our oil reserves, our nuclear facilities. Said it was for defense planning, but it felt more like they were taking inventory. That evening, President Hayes called another emergency meeting. The evidence was mounting that the aliens were not what they appeared to be. Options? She asked her advisors. We confront them, said Admiral Carter. Lay out what we know and demand the truth. That could backfire, warned Amy Johnson. If they are part of some larger scheme, confronting them might accelerate their timeline. It's already accelerating, said Dr. Martinez, holding up Emma's latest translations. They're getting pressure from their superiors to complete whatever they're doing here. President Hayes looked around the room at faces filled with worry and determination. Then we need to know what we're really dealing with. Set up another meeting with Envoy Keth9. It's time to ask the hard questions. Outside in the Kansas wheat field, the silver ship sat silently under the stars. But inside, alien voices were urgently discussing the troublesome humans who wouldn't stop asking questions. President Hayes walked into the same tent where she had first met the aliens 5 days ago. This time, she carried a folder full of evidence and a recording device. Behind her stood Admiral Carter, General Rodriguez, and Dr. Martinez. The atmosphere was different now. The polite curiosity of first contact had been replaced by cold suspicion. Envoy Keth9 was waiting at the same metal table, but he seemed less composed than before. His large eyes kept darting to the humans' faces, as if trying to read their intentions. Thank you for meeting with us again, President Hayes said, sitting down across from the alien. We've had time to consider your offer, and we have some additional questions. Of course, replied Keth9. But his voice lacked the smooth confidence from their first meeting. President Hayes opened her folder and pulled out several documents. We've been doing research on galactic threats. Surprisingly, we found no evidence of these pirates, slavers, or destroyers you mentioned. The alien shifted in his chair. As I explained, such information is classified for security reasons. We also analyzed your ship's technology, continued Admiral Carter. It's impressive, but not nearly as advanced as we would expect from a civilization that's been spacefaring for thousands of years. Dr. Martinez leaned forward. And we've been monitoring radio communications. We know you've been talking to someone else, reporting on our responses to your offer. For the first time, Envoy Keth9 looked genuinely uncomfortable. Internal communications are necessary for coordination. Coordination with whom? Asked General Rodriguez. You said you were an independent defense organization. President Hayes pulled out a transcript of Emma Chen's intercepted messages. We've translated some of your communications references to patrol frequencies, collection schedules, and something called harvester fleets. The alien's pale skin seemed to grow even paler. I don't know what you think you heard, but we heard enough, President Hayes interrupted. You're not here to protect us. You're here to prepare us for someone else. The question is, who? The tent fell silent except for the sound of wind rustling through the wheat field outside. Keth9 stared at the humans for a long moment, and they could see him weighing his options. Finally, he spoke. You don't understand the forces you're dealing with. Then explain them to us, said Admiral Carter. Keth9's shoulders sagged, and for the first time, he looked tired. The harvesters come for every world eventually. They take everything. Resources, technology, populations. They strip planets bare and move on to the next system. And your role in this? Asked Dr. Martinez. We offer species a choice. Submit to Galactic Defense Initiative management, provide resources and labor, and when the harvesters come, a percentage of your population survives as workers. Fuse, and they take everything. The humans exchanged glances. This was worse than they had imagined. How many worlds have you done this to? Asked President Hayes. Hundreds. Most species accept the arrangement. Once they understand the alternative, General Rodriguez leaned back in his chair. So you're basically tax collectors for these harvesters. We prefer to think of ourselves as offering species a chance to survive. And if we refuse your generous offer, asked Admiral Carter. Keth-9 looked directly at her. Then you face them alone, as every stubborn species has before you. How many species have successfully fought off these harvesters? Asked Dr. Martinez. The alien was quiet for a long moment. None. President Hayes closed her folder and stood up. When will they arrive? Their advanced scouts are already in your system, conducting preliminary surveys. The main fleet will arrive within 2 weeks. The tent erupted in urgent whispers between the human officials, but President Hayes held up her hand for silence. Weeks, she repeated. And you've been stalling us, keeping us from preparing while they got into position. We're giving you time to make the rational choice, Keth-9 protested. The rational choice, said Admiral Carter, would have been to warn us about this threat from the beginning and let us decide how to respond. You would have chosen to fight. All young species do, and you would have been destroyed. President Hayes looked at the alien with something approaching pity. You really don't know humans very well, do you? We have studied your species extensively. You are technologically advanced, but lack space-based military capabilities. You are divided into competing nations and often fight among yourselves. You would be no match for the harvesters. Have you studied our history? Asked General Rodriguez. Of course, wars, conflicts, political divisions. Did you study what happens when humans face an outside threat? Keth-9 looked confused. I don't understand. Dr. Martinez smiled grimly. Every time someone from outside has threatened humanity, we've stopped fighting each other and started fighting them, usually with spectacular results for the outsiders. This is different, the alien insisted. The harvesters have technology beyond your understanding. So did the British Empire when they faced a bunch of farmers with muskets, said Admiral Carter. So did the Nazis when they thought they could conquer the world. So did every bully who ever thought humans would just roll over. President Hayes sat back down and looked directly at Keth-9. Tell me about the harvesters. What are their capabilities? How many ships? What weapons? I cannot. You can, and you will, she interrupted. Because whether you help us or not, we're going to fight them. The only question is whether you want to be on the side that wins or the side that's been running. A protection racket for cowards. Keth-9 stared at her in shock. You cannot possibly believe you can defeat them. Maybe not, admitted President Hayes. But we're going to try. And if we lose, it won't be because we rolled over and let them take what they wanted. Admiral Carter leaned forward. Start talking. Fleet composition, weapons systems, tactics. Everything you know. If I help you, they'll kill me. If you don't help us, and we somehow win, we'll remember who was on which side, said General Rodriguez. The alien looked around the tent at the human faces. They were calm, determined, and completely serious about fighting an enemy that had never been defeated. 500 ships, he said quietly. Each one the size of your largest cities. Energy weapons that can crack planets. Boarding parties that have conquered worlds with billions of inhabitants. Weaknesses? Asked Dr. Martinez. They rely on fear. Most species surrender before fighting begins. They're not used to real resistance. What else? Their ships aren't heavily armored, but not very maneuverable. They're designed for attacking stationary targets, not for fighting other spacecraft. Admiral Carter was taking notes. Command structure? Hierarchical, very rigid. You could disrupt their command ships. The rest might lose coordination. President Hayes stood up again. Thank you for the information. Now you have a choice. Help us fight them, or get off our planet before we start preparing. You're making a terrible mistake, Keth-9 said, but his voice lacked conviction. Maybe, she replied, but it's our mistake to make. As the humans left the tent, they could hear Keth-9 speaking rapidly in his own language, presumably reporting to his superiors. It no longer mattered. The pretense was over. Outside, Joe Miller was talking to another reporter. A lot of activity. Around here lately, he was saying. Military folks coming and going. That alien seems pretty upset about something. Within hours, emergency meetings were taking place in every major capital on Earth. The news was spreading through secure channels. Humanity had 2 weeks to prepare for a war unlike anything in its history, in her bedroom in California. Emma Chen was monitoring alien communications with new urgency. The messages she was intercepting now were frantic. Confused reports about human reactions that didn't match any known patterns. Subjects rejecting standard protocols, she translated for her mother. Showing signs of dangerous unpredictability. Recommend immediate withdrawal. Dr. Linda Chen looked at her daughter's notes with growing amazement. They're scared of us, should they be? Asked Emma. Her mother thought about human history, about every time someone had tried to conquer or intimidate humanity. Yes, she said. They really should be. The phone call went out at exactly 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Every world leader received the same message from President Hayes. Emergency. Alien invasion fleet incoming. 2 weeks to prepare. Conference call in 1 hour. For the first time in human, the most remarkable transformation in human civilization began. Countries that had been enemies for decades suddenly became allies. Military bases that had pointed weapons at each other started sharing technology and resources. Colonel. Before, a unified Earth Defense Force, he stood in a hastily converted airplane hangar in Colorado, looking at officers from every major military in the world. We have 13 days, he told them. 13 days to build a space navy from scratch. Using technology, we're still figuring out to fight an enemy that's never been defeated. A Russian general raised his hand. What assets do we have? Every satellite, every space station, every rocket on the planet, Parker replied. Plus, whatever we can build, steal, or improvise in less than 2 weeks. Dr. Ben Clark was in his element. He had been given unlimited resources and told to reverse engineer alien technology as fast as possible. The bad news is, we still need to understand it in 12 days. We've figured out their basic engine design. We can't build one from scratch, but we might be able to modify what they left behind. The Galactic Defense Initiative ship was still sitting in Joe Miller's wheat field, but now it was surrounded by the most intensive engineering project in human history. Teams worked around the clock, cutting into the hull, analyzing every component, and trying to understand technology that was 50 years ahead of human science. It's like trying to build a computer by looking at a smartphone, complained Dr. Alex Wright, who was leading the weapons analysis team. Meanwhile, in factories around the world, the most incredible retooling effort ever attempted was taking place. Car manufacturers stopped making cars and started making spacecraft components. Electronics companies abandoned consumer products to build weapon systems. Had owned a small restaurant in San Francisco until 3 days ago. Now he was advising the military on improvised explosive devices after accidentally demonstrating that his knowledge of chemistry and timing from cooking could be applied to making very effective bombs. Cooking and demolition aren't that different. He explained to a room full of generals who were taking notes. It's all about temperature, timing, and mixing the right ingredients in the right proportions. Emma Chen had become the youngest person ever to receive a top-secret security clearance. She was now part of a team monitoring all alien communications, and what she was hearing worried her. They're pulling back, she told Admiral Carter during a briefing.
The Galactic Defense Initiative ships are leaving Earth orbit and moving.
Away from our solar system? Running away? Asked the Admiral. No, they're getting to a safe distance before the harvesters arrive. But there's something else. They keep mentioning that humans are acting wrong. Wrong how? Emma looked at her translated notes. Dr. Rachel Kim was analyzing human behavior patterns during the crisis and finding results that amazed her. Crime rates have dropped to almost zero, she reported to the Emergency Psychology Council. Domestic violence is down 90%. Even divorce filings have stopped. Why? Asked Dr. Dan Morris. External threat response. When humans face, it's the same pattern we've seen in every major war, but this time it's the entire species. The most remarkable changes were happening in unexpected places. Dr. Lucy Adams was an artist who had never built anything more dangerous than a sculpture. Art is about seeing things differently, she explained to the Weapons Development Committee. War is the same thing. You have to think creatively about how to solve problems. Her paint bombs had already been tested and proven effective at confusing targeting systems. The military was now planning to use them to create massive clouds of sensor-disrupting particles in space. In Detroit, former auto worker Pete Jackson had organized the Detroit Volunteer Battalion. Now we're just making them work in space. His team had modified everything from pickup trucks to motorcycles, turning them into one-person fighter craft that could operate in zero gravity. They looked ridiculous, but early tests showed they were surprisingly effective. Captain Roy Henderson was overseeing the construction of New Texas Space Station, being built from components of the International Space Station refinery. New Texas was being designed as a mobile command center that could coordinate Earth's defense while serving as a weapons platform. A veterinarian from Ohio had figured out how to use medical scanners to detect alien ship movements. Kelly Brooks, who had been teaching high school chemistry, was now building rocket fuel in her garage that was more efficient than anything NASA had ever produced. Even children were contributing. Their understanding of three-dimensional movement and tactical thinking turned out to be exactly what was needed for space combat. These kids have been playing space war games their entire lives, explained Lieutenant Commander Gary Phillips, who was training the new pilots. They already think in terms of zero-gravity combat. We just need to teach them to do it for real. Emma Chen intercepted increasingly panicked communications as the Galactic Defense Initiative tried to report what they were seeing. Subjects showing unprecedented cooperation levels, she translated. Military production increasing exponentially. Civilian population volunteering for combat roles does not match any known species behavior patterns. One message particularly: worry the aliens, recommend extreme caution. Dr. Martinez laughed when he heard that translation. They're not wrong. Have you seen the recruitment numbers? People are lining up to volunteer for the most dangerous assignments. When the government had called for volunteers for experimental spacecraft testing, they received 10 million applications in the first day. When they asked for volunteers for suicide missions, they got 5 million more. It's like the entire, observed Dr. Kim. President Hayes was coordinating the global effort from a command center that had been built in the basement of the White House in just 4 days. Representatives from every country worked side by side, sharing resources and information without the usual diplomatic delays. Status report, she called out to the room. Weapons production ahead of schedule, reported General Rodriguez. Have approximately 2,000 armed spacecraft ready for launch. Personnel training. 50,000 pilots certified for space combat. Another 100,000 in basic training. Defensive positions. Orbital platforms operational in 6 days. Ground-based weapons online and ready. President Hayes looked around the room at faces that showed exhaustion but also determination. Any word from our alien friends? Emma Chen looked up from her radio equipment. They're asking their superiors for permission to withdraw completely from this sector. They're calling us an unacceptable risk to operational security. Good, said President Hayes. Let them be scared. In 5 days, they're going to see what happens when you threaten humans and give us time to prepare. They worked with the focused intensity of a species that had spent its entire history preparing for exactly this moment. The Harvester fleet appeared at the edge of the solar system like a dark cloud blotting out the stars. 500 ships, each one larger than any city on Earth, moved in perfect formation toward the small blue planet that had refused their generous offer of survival. Emma Chen was the first human to detect them. She had been monitoring space with equipment that was now 10 times more powerful than what she had built in her bedroom 2 weeks ago. They're here, she announced to the command center. Her voice was calm, but her hands shook slightly as she adjusted her headphones on the space station New Texas. Captain Roy Henderson received the alert and immediately opened communications with the approaching fleet. The station was ugly, built from scavenged parts and held together with determination. But it was armed with weapons that no one in the galaxy had ever seen before. This is Earth Defense Force Henderson broadcast. State your intentions. Response came as a transmission that reached every radio, television, and communication device on Earth. The voice was deep and cold, like metal grinding against stone. We are the Harvesters. surrender your world's resources and submit to collection, or be destroyed. This is the only warning you will receive. President Hayes was in the White House Command Center, surrounded by representatives from every nation on Earth. She looked around the room at faces that showed no fear, only determination. "Open a channel to the entire planet," she ordered. Within seconds, her voice was being broadcast everywhere humans could hear it. "This is President Hayes speaking to all of humanity. We asked what we needed protection from. Now we have our answer. These aliens want to harvest our world like we're crops in a field. Our response is simple: come and take it." The cheers that erupted from the command center were echoed in cities around the world. Humans had been preparing for this moment for 2 weeks, and they were ready. The first attack came 30 minutes later. Harvester ships fired energy beams that could crack planets, aiming for Earth's major cities. But the beams struck defensive shields that flickered with colors no alien had ever seen. The shields held. "Impossible," muttered a Harvester commander, according to communications Emma Chen intercepted. "No species has technology capable of deflecting our primary weapons." What the Harvesters didn't know was that human shields weren't based on any single technology. They were combinations of alien energy fields, human engineering, and pure creative madness. Dr. Lucy Adams' paint had been mixed with quantum particles. Bobby Lou's explosive expertise had been applied to energy redirection. The result was defensive systems that worked in ways that violated several laws of physics. The real surprise came when Earth fought back. Lieutenant Kelly Brooks launched from New Texas in a fighter craft that had been built in her grandfather's garage. It looked like a motorcycle with rocket engines welded to the sides, because that's exactly what it was. She flew toward the largest Harvester ship. She was singing Johnny Cash songs over the communication channel. "I fell into a burning ring of fire," she sang, as she dodged enemy weapons fire. "I went down, 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 and the flames went higher." She slammed her improvised fighter directly into a Harvester cruiser's main engine. The explosion lit up space. For thousands of miles, the Harvesters had never encountered anything like this. In their 1,000 years of conquering worlds, they had faced desperate last stands, clever tactics, and advanced technology. But they had never faced a species that treated war like entertainment. Pete Jackson's Detroit Volunteer Battalion launched. Next, 300 modified vehicles, each one unique, swarmed the enemy fleet like angry insects. They had no unified design, no standard tactics, and no predictable behavior patterns. "This is Detroit calling," Pete broadcast as his converted pickup truck fired missiles made from car parts and alien technology. "We're here to discuss your warranty." The Harvesters tried to adapt their targeting systems, but human unpredictability made it impossible. Every human fighter behaved differently. Some flew in formation, others attacked alone, some followed military tactics, others made up their own rules as they went along. Dr. Ben Clark had weaponized everything from household chemicals to nuclear reactors. His team had created weapons that no sane engineer would ever design, including bombs that painted enemy ships with material that interfered with their navigation systems. The Battle of the Rainbow Nebula, as it came to be known, occurred when Dr. Lucy Adams' paint bombs turned an entire section of space into a psychedelic light show. Harvester ships found themselves flying blind through clouds of glittering particles, while human fighters attacked from every direction. "We cannot predict their movements," reported a Harvester tactical officer. "Their behavior patterns make no logical sense." That was exactly the point. Humans had spent 2 weeks studying Harvester tactics, which were efficient, logical, and completely predictable. So Earth's strategy was to be as illogical and unpredictable as possible. Captain Henderson, commanding New Texas, actually thanked enemy commanders for their educational value. After successfully defending his improvised space station for the 3rd time, "This has been very instructive," he broadcast to a Harvester fleet commander. "We've learned a lot about your weapon systems. Would you mind trying that particle beam again? We want to test our new shields." The Harvesters were discovering that humans learned faster than any species they had ever encountered. Tactics that worked in the first hour of battle were useless by the second hour because humans had already figured out countermeasures. Dr. Sophie Taylor had turned the International Space Station into a mobile weapons platform that fired missiles made from repurposed satellite components. When harvester ships tried to target her, she would spin the station like a carnival ride while continuing to shoot at them. "This is Sophie's funhouse," she announced during one particularly intense battle. "Please keep your arms and tentacles inside the ride at all times." Emma Chen was monitoring enemy communications and translating increasingly panicked reports. "Subjects demonstrate impossible learning curve," she read to Admiral Carter. "Adapting to our tactics faster than computer models predict. Recommend immediate withdrawal. They're learning about us too fast," another message said. "Every engagement teaches them more about our capabilities while revealing nothing about theirs." The turning point came when the harvesters realized that every human defeat only made the rest of humanity fight harder. When they destroyed a squadron of fighters, the pilot's friends would attack with twice the fury. When they damaged a space station, the crew would rebuild it stronger and use the experience to improve their defenses. "This species treats casualties as learning opportunities," reported a harvester analyst. "Loss of personnel increases rather than decreases their combat effectiveness." After 72 hours of continuous battle, the harvester fleet was in full retreat. Their final transmission was intercepted by Emma Chen and broadcast around the world, marking system as unsuitable for harvesting. "Species shows signs of dangerous evolutionary deviation. Commend immediate quarantine protocols." As the alien ships fled, President Hayes addressed the world again. "We've received messages from species across the galaxy asking how we defeated the harvesters. Our answer is simple. We asked the right question. When someone offers to protect you, always ask from what. When you get an answer you don't like, make sure you're ready to become the thing they need protection from." The celebration lasted for weeks. Humans had not only survived their first interstellar war, they had won it decisively. More importantly, they had done it by being completely, chaotically, magnificently human. The Galactic Defense Initiative dissolved within months. Their protection racket was exposed when the story of Earth's victory spread throughout the galaxy. Other species began asking the same questions humans had asked, and the answers they received were just as unsatisfactory. Joe Miller went back to farming, but his wheat field had become a tourist destination. Visitors from around the world came to see where humanity's space age had begun, still growing wheat, he told reporters. "But now I look up at the stars and wonder what other interesting questions we might need to ask." In her bedroom, Emma Chen continued monitoring radio frequencies. But now she was listening for signals from other species who might need help asking the right questions about their own galactic protectors. Because humans had learned something important. The best way to stay free was to make sure everyone else knew how to ask uncomfortable questions about anyone offering easy answers.